We're going to take a look at Galatians chapter 2, verses 7 through 9. And let me just read to you verse 9 to give you a little bit of a preview of what we're going to talk about right now. It said, "And when James and Cephas and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that was given to me, they gave the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and me, that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised." We see in here lines of demarcation. In the mid-70s, I served in the United States Army as a tank platoon leader. In our company, there were 3 tank platoons, and in the battalion, 3 tank companies. On many occasions, we went to the field to train in combat operations, and in most cases, we were given a joint mission with other tank platoons in the battalion. And in that, we were given company objectives and subsequent platoon orders. And one of the things that would come to us as a platoon leader in these orders were certain lanes of operation to the objective. We were supposed to stay within these lines marked on a map so that we wouldn't accidentally cross over into another tank platoon's area and have a friendly fire incident. This was so that the entire battlefield also would be covered and to prevent that possibility of having a friendly fire problem, injuring some of our own people. On one occasion, though, while we were maneuvering on a training exercise, it happened that another platoon from our company crossed over in front of our platoon while we were maneuvering down our lane. It wasn't intentional, but platoon leader of that unit, which was supposed to be on our right flank, got lost and ended up crossing into our line of fire. We nearly engaged them with simulated fire from our tanks until I saw the platoon leader standing on the turret of his tank with his map all spread out, trying to figure out where he was. And so I didn't order our platoon, to engage with simulated fire. But you can see what the problem would have been. If this were a real combat situation, the results could have been disastrous. The problem is any delay in engaging the enemy in a tank battle when you see them could be a disaster. The guy that gets the first shot off generally is going to win. And in this particular situation, I could have either engaged a friendly person, or if I delayed and it really wasn't a friendly person, they could have engaged me. So this was a dangerous situation if it were real. But the point I'm trying to make is this, that lines of demarcation have an appropriate role in situations in life and in ministry. And in the beginning of Paul's letter to the churches in Galatia, Paul validated his apostolic authority and his message as truth in a variety of ways. Now he presented an additional proof. It was the authenticated lines of demarcation in the ministries of the Jerusalem leaders, mainly Peter, and his ministry. Now, Paul met with the leaders of the Jerusalem church, and in this meeting, a lot of important things had already happened. But in these verses, we see the demarcation of responsibilities. Peter and the Jerusalem leaders were to reach the circumcised, that is, the Jews, and Paul was to take the gospel to the uncircumcised, that is, the Gentile regions. It is important to note that this demarcation was not set up by Paul and the Jerusalem leaders. A lot of people make that mistake, but if we look carefully at these verses, we will see that it was the Lord had established these areas of ministry responsibility. Look at what it says in verses 7 and 8 of Galatians chapter 2. Paul writes, "On the contrary, when they saw," talking about the Jerusalem leaders, "when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel to the circumcised, for he who worked through Peter for his apostolic ministry to the circumcised worked also through me for mine to the Gentiles." The key words that we see there that help us to understand what's going on are the words entrusted and worked through. These reveal to us that the Lord established and empowered both Peter's ministry to the Jews and Paul's to the Gentiles. So what really happened in this meeting that was so important? And we see it in the verse number 9. And it reads this way, which I read in the beginning. It says, "And when James and Cephas and John," and Cephas being Peter, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that was given to me, referring to Paul. They gave the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and me, that we should go into the Gentiles, and they to the uncircumcised, or to the circumcised. The Jerusalem leaders perceived that the power of God's grace had been given to Paul for this ministry to the Gentiles. And seeing this, they affirmed Paul's calling to preach the gospel in the remote regions, and extended both to Paul and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, concluding that Paul would go to the uncircumcised with the gospel, and that they would focus on the circumcised. You see, God is a God of order. And we must, as believers, those called to minister the gospel, those called as believers to partake in the gospel mission, we're to sense and to follow his leading in the areas of ministry. We're to sense where he wants us to serve, what church he wants us to be in to do service. We're to sense, as missionaries must, is where they're going to go and serve the Lord. And those things are established by the Lord himself. He's the one that puts us into various areas of ministry. Moreover, we see a precedent here, though, of receiving affirmation from spiritual men in this calling. This is what happens when churches ordain people to the gospel ministry. The Lord is the one who ultimately has appointed a person to a specific ministry, a specific gospel ministry, yet it is a council of men through observation and examination who will affirm that the Lord indeed has chosen a specific person for an area of ministry. Every one of us are called to do something for the Lord, but we really ought to seek those who are spiritual leaders, reputable people filled with the Spirit, and get their guidance and talk to them about it. Because in prayer and examination, they will see if God's grace is really upon us for that work. And then they will support and encourage us in it, just as we see in this meeting between Paul and Peter.